Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to the 706 podcast. My name is Kirk. I'm your host for this evening. I'm joined by my three glorious co hosts, Connor, Anthony, and Tony. Why don't you guys say hi in that order?
Hey everybody, I'm Connor. Eye color blue.
I'm Anthony, eye color brown.
I'm Tony, and you know what? It changes. I'm special.
And already I've noticed that my co hosts have not intently watched the film, as if they had, they would realize that eye color does not matter for this particular conceit. And we are, of course, talking about the 2014 film I Origins, written and directed by Mike Cahill. His only real other Boxers and Ballerinas was a documentary I never saw, but he made Another Earth, which kind of has the same metaphysical, mind-bending, paradigm-shifting elements, I guess, intrigue elements that you might associate with him. So I nominated this film last week, and I am a strong proponent of this particular film, but also its main actor, one Michael Pitt. He's, I think, clinically underrated as an actor with tremendous range and just a certain presence that we don't really get nowadays in Hollywood, with all of the Chris Pines and I don't know what the not Robert Downey Jr., but the Thor guy. What's the Thor guy's name? Help me out, guys.
Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah, those types of guys. You can just tell that Michael Pitt is well read, right? Like, if Leonardo DiCaprio lives in Battery Park City, you know where Michael Pitt lives? He lives in Bushwick, all right? He fucking lives on the L train. Michael Pitt is a real one. Anyways,
Kirk, have you done the Google search he does to the woman? Did you take a picture of the billboard and find his eyes and then track him down?
Yeah. Well, no, not particularly, but I was almost at that point, of lustfulness. So yes, let's discuss the movie I Origins. Is pretty hard to summarize, I guess. It's kind of all over the place, kind of twists and turns, but why don't we'll kind of flesh out the narrative as we go along. I do want to go with Anthony first, as Anthony so graciously and nobly and courageously chose this film to watch. And I am very intrigued to hear what all three of you have to say. And I certainly hope this doesn't turn into some sort of derogatory mess, but we will see, because this movie could be potentially, and I might expect it to be, I guess, polarizing. So one of the more polarizing films we've done recently, where we've kind of stuck to more critically acclaimed films, Book of Henry notwithstanding. But anyways, Anthony, go ahead, take us off. What did you think? Be kind. All right, go ahead.
Now, all right. So I think I picked this movie last week for a number of different reasons. One, of course, I don't think we've had done a Michael Pitt movie until this point. And of course, I wanted to see kind of Kirk's fascination with him as an actor, even though I'd seen him in some other stuff. I wanted a movie that Kirk had picked with him in it. Two, Kirk had nominated before, so of course I wanted to kind of give it a shot. And then finally, I think, and this was really the chief reason, is it's a film I just hadn't seen before. It's a film none of us, I think, had seen before besides you, Kirk. And that doesn't often happen. It's a more recent one, and I kind of wanted something where I was going to go in completely blind, even though you kind of mentioned some of the other actors and stuff, and you claimed there was an actress that I was going to be all over. But really, I think actually the surprise might be is that Britt Marling was more the actress than I think the one that you thought, who plays a great scientist in this movie. But anyway, as for the movie itself, I got to say I'm kind of mixed. I think the movie was kind of just fine at times. I got to give it a lot of credit for trying something new and trying something different. I think at times its ambition is a little too much for what's kind of set out in the movie. Kind of things kind of not necessarily go off the rails, but they don't kind of stay consistent or controlled. I think I will say too is the movie though, the moment where it really gets me and where I actually think it's really brave is after the death of his girlfriend. We get this weird moment of like necrophiliac obsession almost, in which Michael Pitt's scientist is at this kind of like loss between, you know, the spiritual and the love for the dead with the scent, the fragrance of this girl that, you know, he can't get out. And it's this great call about how like the senses can bring us back to the past. But the movie takes it to its furthest point, which is where he pulls up an old image of her on his computer and like basically starts to masturbate to this image. And this moment that I love isn't that that happens in the movie, but I love is how his pregnant wife comes in and doesn't feel jealous, doesn't feel disrespected, but at first wants to actually see what he's into. And I found that moment really fascinating on a movie level, and not just because it was like maybe edgy or anything, but because it actually really probed into these characters' psyches, I thought, in a way that was really fascinating for a movie. But I gotta say, that seemed the furthest point, and the movie, though, as a whole, didn't really kind of work for me, especially towards the end, when it kind of got towards that spiritual realm of like, I didn't quite understand, you know, if the movie had set it up well enough for that. Maybe I needed to almost rewatch it. Maybe I needed to be more open to that sort of realm for it to work. I don't know, but I think, you know, I got to applaud the movie for certain things and not applaud it for the way it landed, maybe is the way to put it. Before I speak too much, I'll just say is I also think at some point during this conversation, we have to bring up the post-credit scene, which was a fascinating moment. I don't know if you guys stayed for it, but oh my God, it's, you know, let's just say Mark Ruffalo when he comes out.
No, I didn't see it, Anthony. I forgot your.
Well,
I'll bring it up later.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later. It is intriguing for some context. This was my second viewing of this film, and I did not know when I nominated this movie that the post-credits scene existed. So Anthony actually clued us into that. I don't know if Connor saw it. We're going to go to Connor next and then round out with Tony. So
I did not see it, Kirk, and I feel that I've given you short shrift. Should we watch it live or something?
Well, we could always through
Live
the magic,
reaction.
Hollywood magic. I don't know. What do we think, guys?
I mean, I can watch it real quick. We can take a 2-second break.
We're obviously, yeah, we're gonna come right back, folks, and we're gonna.
It's unprecedented, but very special.
We're gonna hit.
Guys, I didn't watch the right movie. Can we just pause for 2 hours?
We're actually watching Gods and Generals. Yeah. Okay. So just YouTube iOrigins end credits scene. You'll find it. It's the first one. It's only a minute long. And we're back, guys. We just actually had those who hadn't seen the scene have watched it now, and we'll get some fresh takes. This is as fresh as it gets on the 706. Let's just say that. It still has a pulse. That's how fresh this is. Anyways, Anthony, why don't you contextualize or perhaps explain for the audience what is happening in this end credits scene and what your reaction was to it?
All right. Well, first of all, you had to see all 25 Marvel movies to understand anything in relation to this film. But no, so in this post-credit scene, we seem to be back in the lab of the lady who kind of has the technology to kind of scan everyone in this database. The database that, of course, is in the film, you know, or the running of the film being currently used in India as a sort of logging system of identity, or, you know, almost like a social security number, but through the eye. But of course, as the film brings up the question is the eye as unique as he really first thought of it? And is the eye really the window to a soul of perhaps a past life? And what the end credits scene seems to do is suggest yes. And if there's all these connections across historical figures, from the good to the evil, to the Hitlers to the Lincolns of the world, and if that's true, where does the world go from there? So that seems to be what the teaser or the end credits is going out. So I'll leave it there. We could go back to it later. It's not that.
So they're connected? Is that what it was showing? I didn't understand. Like, I thought it was showing
the reincarnated.
You know, Gandhi has been reincarnated.
Any ambiguity about what the eye connection meant is now gone, and we're meant to believe that reincarnation exists in this film. So yes, that is what the end credits
Oh, okay.
scene
I
serves to.
I don't know how I missed that, but yes, okay.
Yeah. So I feel like I before we get to Connor, I just do want to give a brief TLDR for this movie. So Michael Pitt is a scientist. He studies the eye. He's also an atheist. He wants to prove the evolutionary progression of the eye because he believes that religious individuals, pundits, use it to prove the existence of God because it's so miraculous, I guess, that sight became a thing for animals. So, anyways, he's going about that. He finally finds it. He's also in a relationship with this woman who's very spiritual, new age. She's foreign, French, Spanish, and it's kind of like oil and water a little bit. And what happens is she ends up actually dying tragically in an elevator accident. And he ends up marrying his research assistant kind of as a second option, whatever. And then the movie jumps 7 years, and we find out that his discovery has granted him some prominence in the scientific community and as this kind of atheist figurehead, right? And he suddenly realizes when he has a child that there may be some connection between his child's eyes and someone who died, their eyes. Like they have the same identical iris patterns, and they also have similar associations for what they like. And so then it's hinted that there's some reincarnation here, and that the eye is actually a window to the soul, right? And so towards the end of the movie, he finds his dead girlfriend's eyes from a scan in India, and he finds this homeless street child from India, and he brings her on. And anyways, I've gone on too long, but the idea is that we're meant to believe that this child actually is his girlfriend reincarnated to some extent. We don't know what the carryover is, obviously, but that his atheistic tendencies have now been completely challenged, and there's something that he can't explain through science and data. So that's what it is. I guess we had to kind of do that for people to understand what we're talking about, because this movie is pretty far out. But Connor, please go ahead and tell us what you thought. Let's hear it.
Kirk, well, let me place it in context. I don't have the Michael Pitt fandom that you do. I only know him, unfortunately, from his classic role as Jimmy Darmody, one of the all-time greatest motherfuckers.
So good.
You could
so
say.
Good.
And I have to say, Kirk, I didn't really vibe with this movie. I found it pretty bad. I don't mean to be too harsh, but I just found the whole premise a little silly. I thought the idea of the conflict of, here, science and religion, obviously interesting, obviously a lofty and worthy theme, interesting to kind of make it also about a relationship, but it felt so surface level to me. And the fact that it was anchored in this vague idea of a girl who's just kind of, she's just into spiritual stuff, kind of whatever, as opposed to he actually fell in love with a religious person, or, it's just this very watered down and kind of meaningless version of what faith would be, and he gets to encounter more of the real thing when he's in India, but they're just in the background, and obviously India represents something, right? Where this doctrine of reincarnation, right, is still alive in some ways, right? But like I said, the movie just doesn't do anything with it. And I found the science stuff was kind of cringe, they're going to grow eyeballs on a fish, and the fact that they talk about which is interesting. It is a true thing, right? This idea of the argument of the eyeball as the perfect creation. We can't explain how it could have evolved, and that's an extremely old idea. It goes back to Darwin, right? Darwin era, basically. And it's been kind of a moot point since then. Now, I know it doesn't have to be. It can bring these questions into the modern day. But then, the fact that once he's had this experiment, his main goal is to rub it in religious people's faces. Apparently, he appears on talk shows just to gloat about it. See, we finally proved it. And it seems like people should be over this by now. The whole evolutionary argument. So yeah. So okay. I'll say that. So most of the movie I was like, and had a laugh at a couple parts, and other parts I found interesting, intriguing, like the death, right? It was kind of a twist, the death of the first girlfriend. The the masturbation scene certainly threw me for a loop. It was an interesting choice. I thought it may have been a little bit too much. I think something a bit more cliche, like looking at her pictures, would have been fine. But where it got interesting was the very ending, where it raises finally the possibility that what if he's wrong and this is just something that he's seeing or something that he wants to be true? What if this is a myth for him, right? Finally, we've gotten somewhere, kind of really interesting because, right, he castigates his girlfriend in a way, right, for just before she dies for believing in, in the fairy tale of God or whatever, right? So very interesting now that maybe he has a fairy tale of his own, right? And that can be his access, right? Of course, the thing is that even though he's anti, religion or anti, fantasy or whatever you want to say, right? The way he goes about investigating, right, this apparently supernatural event is purely scientific, right? That he needs to do experiments to prove it, right? So wouldn't it be interesting, right, if there was a confrontation on that maybe he thinks that he can't experiment, right, to find it out? What if it's maybe that's something that is not falsifiable, right? There's just something that could have happened there, but it didn't. And, I was a little disappointed in that. And the ending credits sequence just kind of throws all of that interesting ambiguity out the window. This is a movie that I almost think, as Tony said for the Book of Henry, what if the Book of Henry did not have the kind of Hallmark style trappings? I didn't think that was true for Book of Henry. I think Book of Henry was effective exactly because it had kind of Hallmark Lifetime movie trappings, right? That created this ambiguity. But what if this movie itself, what if I Origins, that is, were Tonyized, and we made Michael Pitt into a creepy weirdo, as he often seems in this movie? He was sweaty all the time. He was, we understood him as an insane man, right? It would explain some of his actions. I think would contextualize his actions in a slightly better way. They're more bleak tone. I think I would have respected that. Everything would have made sense to me a bit more, but as it was, I didn't really vibe with it. But I'm glad I watched
this version, Connor, he would have ducked the Indian girl, obviously.
Back to
the United States to do more experiments, and he'd be mad at her for failing the test. He'd blame her and say, "You're coming with me back to America for more horrible experiments." So that would be there.
Yeah, exactly.
Classic. I love how Tony's synonymous with violence against women. We love it, guys, on the 706. It's a classic trope. JK. But Connor, I do have to ask an important question.
Sure, Kirk.
How was the acting from Mr. Pitt? How was it?
It was good. I have to say he put in a good performance.
Thank you. Oh, this is a lashing, and I know Tony's just he's reveling in this.
He always says this.
He
always makes these assumptions.
So ready. All right. Well, go ahead, Tony.
Kirk, you're always making asses out of you and me on this.
I guess there's asses to be had all around. Go ahead, Kirk, Tony.
This was my favorite movie I'd seen all year until I watched that end credit scene, and now it's my least favorite. It ruined the
honestly, that could be a real take.
Could be.
And I'll talk about my own take, but go ahead, Tony.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm probably closer to Anthony than Connor. I didn't hate this movie or anything. I mean, I do have to give this movie some props in terms of I do think it is kind of audacious. It is kind of bold, which I always respect. Kind of the weirdness of the premise, this willingness to it feels very earnest. This movie feels incredibly earnest. I do believe that Mike Cahill finds these ideas really interesting and really is into this whole, from what I know about his other works, this is a theme he really explores, is this tension between science and faith, kind of like Damon Lindelof, from Lost and The Leftovers, and that's a thing. And if you watch those shows, you can feel that's a similar earnest kind of and there's a reason this theme is so eternal. There's a reason this theme is such a staple of art and a staple of literature, and this thing we return to over and over again, because it is interesting, and you can feel watching this movie that is a real passion of his, a real fascination of his. And this movie, we don't see a lot of movies that are willing to really deal with faith in a really earnest way, because I think that it's very easy to be smug about it. It's very easy to be cynical about it. And the fact that this movie is never smug or cynical about faith and about religion, and tries to take it on in a very earnest way, I think is very admirable. And the fact that I think, especially in the first half, there is kind of a reverence. There's almost a Malick feel, in like terms of like, there's the handheld and the lighting is very like heavenly. There's a lot of the daylight kind of washed out, really bright look to these scenes. Very beautiful. The way things are edited with like the voiceover, there is this kind of reverential, almost like spiritual feel that for the first half at times did kind of sweeten me up. I particularly liked, there was a scene, just a very minor scene where Michael Pitt and Steven Yeun are just having a conversation, and they've got the Radiohead song in the background, which comes back at the very end, which also a great music choice. Motion picture soundtrack by Radiohead, amazing song, great way to end the movie. And there's talking with the music in the background. It feels very naturalistic. And similarly with now the love story, it was pretty male fantasy, it was the whole thing with the subway, putting the headphones on.
Bridge the hot chick.
Like just going up to the girl, putting her headphones on. I put my headphones on and say, "Have you ever heard Death Grips?" And she's like,
"Fuck! I was gonna make that joke. God damn it! That exact same joke."
What?
But the Sonic Adventure 2 soundtrack.
That's how my grandfather met my grandmother in World War II.
It was a different time, Kirk. What did he play for her? What song was it?
Ode to Joy, I guess.
Ode to Joy.
Nice.
Anyway, so that whole sequence was pretty cringe. But here's the thing, though. From the masturbation scene to the subway scene to the I'm trying to think of another good example. Oh, the subway, the ridiculous death scene where she's torn in half. This movie has an admirable willingness to be cringe. This movie, every other scene, swings so freaking hard at the ball that no matter how big it misses, I can't help but admire, wow, you really went for it, man. You really that was so cringe. But you know what? That takes balls, because so many creators, so many artists go for the irony and go for that kind of cynicism because it's easy. It's like the old David Foster Wallace point. It's like the irony is easy because it keeps you safe. Because you're not revealing any of yourself. You're not taking any risks. It takes risks to make a movie like I Origins, where you are kind of putting yourself out there, and you include a scene where a guy jerks off to videos of his dead wife, and his pregnant wife walks in and says, "What you doing, hun?" I mean, the fact that he included that in the movie, I think, is kind of admirable and kind of cool. That sounds like a very backhanded compliment, but for me, that is a compliment. I mean, that's the sort of thing I like. So I thought the music was good. I thought the score was pretty tasteful. It got me into the vibe of the movie. I thought it was pretty well utilized. Maybe towards the end, it was a little heavy-handed, but for the first half in particular, which I do think is the stronger half in general, I think once he goes to India, the movie kind of loses me. I think the screenplay, and this is another thing that makes the movie unconventional, is structurally very weird. The wife dies, and then there's this whole other, it feels like a completely different movie, honestly. It feels like two kind of stories that are kind of awkwardly grafted together with the same theme, in a way that doesn't really work for me. And I think that, to me, is the movie's biggest failing. I think if this movie were really structurally sound and really narratively coherent, even if it contains some of these, quote unquote cringe moments or some of these things that didn't really agree with me, I would have liked it a lot more. But the movie as it is, I think, isn't quite 100%. I feel like the screenplay probably needed another draft. It probably needed to be tightened up, polished a little bit. But I will agree, I think Michael Pitt gives a good performance. And it was interesting watching him because I was thinking, watching it through the lens of he's one of your guys, right? And I kind of get I kind of see what you like, because he does have a very particular way of just speaking and moving, and there's something about him, but he honestly reminds me of Leonardo DiCaprio in a lot of ways. The way he reads his lines and the way he reacts to things, I can't describe it very well because I'm not good at describing acting, but I felt very Leo. I don't know if that's a self-conscious influence or if it's just sort of shared influences or what, but anyway, those were my thoughts on I Origins.
All right, thank you, Tony. I actually, and thank you, Connor, and thank you, Anthony. This was kind of a treat for me, really, to be honest. I didn't have high expectations. I thought I would get lambasted, and even Connor, though he said it didn't really gel for him, he also brought up some pieces he thought were perhaps provocative or novel in a certain way, or interesting, I guess. So this movie, for me, what really I love about this film, I am an emotional viewer. I tend to gravitate towards certain feeling states when I'm watching a film. What is the movie making me or suggesting I feel? And can I buy into that? So that's like 1A and 1B of like my movie experience. Unless it's, even with like heist movies, like is the movie creating enough tension for me to really kind of feel that adrenaline, at least in a vicarious sense, right? And so in this movie, the longing, just the tragedy of that death, and I realize the male fantasy, you could say manic pixie dream girl, you could say all the cliches. It's true. Fine. It's also just like, I guess it's like kind of an indulgence for me. I found it to be there to be something that I really did enjoy about their kind of courtship, and it was almost dreamlike, right? In the sense that this wouldn't work, and he even says that later, like this was never going to work between us. I just didn't get closure, and I think that's key for what happens later in the movie. So yeah, and there's other things that I love. I saw this movie while I was living in New York, and I'm still living in New York technically, but I love how he searches for the diner, he finds it. It's on the L train, it's at the Bedford stop. He's got the Richard Dawkins book. He's talking to her, she's handing out Mentos. He's on the M train, putting his headphones over her, which is, yeah, is cringe is a word, fine. It is a word, and I freely admit if somebody else suggested this movie, I would probably
I
be throwing.
apologize for using the C word, Kirk. It's a very unhelpful word.
No, it's fine. Tony used it too. Even more so. But I agree. Cringe is definitely a word here. I would say naive or on the nose or
Sentimental,
yeah, there's a
mawkish, yeah.
there's a mawkish sentimentality to this movie. And there's a mawkish sentimentality to a lot of my favorite movies. So I guess that makes me maybe a sucker, right? Like a sentimentalist, right? But anyways, the thing that works for me is this movie has a very nuanced take on faith, right? If you ask somebody like name a religious movie, they're going to say like what, God's not dead, right? Like what are you going to say? Like a movie that actually not proselytized but like presents religion in a less cynical view, like that's not about child abuse, that's not about the myths of the past or whatever, or like historical oppression. That's more cross-cultural and actually, I guess you would say like pantheistic, right? Like because this isn't about like Judeo-Christianity per se. This is about reincarnation, this is about spirituality, right? And I think our generation is tending towards spirituality as opposed to religion. So I thought it was even more kind of relevant. But the thing that works for me is that, so I bought into the relationship in the beginning. So I felt that loss. And so I was there with him and I understood, with the perfume, and like I felt like he was settling, like maybe he loved his wife, but it was like kind of a devoted love, like a determined love, not like a wistful love. But the real problem was he never got closure. And so to me, the end of the movie, what it does is when the girl is afraid to go on the elevator, what it says to me, and I'm blanking out the end credit scene, but what it says to me is he's realizing that the fact that this girl is afraid of an elevator is by no means a valid data point on any sort of scientific like index, right? Like it's a correlation, right? Or it's just a aberration, right? But to him, it holds meaning. So he starts to understand that that spirituality is not necessarily about the truth. It's about the meaning. And that's what faith is about to me, like in some weird way. And I don't want to get too deep in like in the dregs of spirituality, but like to me, it's almost like he realizes that this action, whatever, seeing this girl run away is a way for him to get closure because it's a way for him to believe that she's still around, right? Like his girlfriend's still around. He was able to carry her down the stairs. And now he's able to kind of let go of that part of his life. And that holds significance. And it's a data point from which he can extract meaning. And that to me is what spirituality is about. It's not about the objective, absolutist, true or false. It's about the interpersonal, the intrapersonal, I guess I should say, the intersubjectivity of it all. And I think that's what's so appealing to me, is it does that in a way. But then again, the end credit scene is just, it flat out puts its stick on the table and says no reincarnation exists. And I didn't really appreciate
And a
that.
sequel tease, which is in the works,
Yeah,
according
well,
to Wikipedia.
am I supposed to watch the credits of every fucking movie I watch? Like, please, can you give us a hint? I don't know. I've probably done an inadequate job of explaining why this movie resonates for me.
No,
I
Kirk.
think,
It was a great
but
explanation.
yeah, oftentimes, and this is, I'm going to lead into a question here for all three of you, and I want you to come up with one example for the question I'm asking. This movie, this is a broad framework that I was thinking about the other day. This movie focuses less on identification or investigation, I shall say, and more on resonation. So what I mean by that is there's not much ambiguity in this movie, really. At least like everything is kind of, here's what's happening. Either you buy it or you don't. I can't remember many times in the film where you're left wondering, oh, there's ambiguity here, there's ambiguity there. It's kind of like either this resonates for you or it doesn't. And I think what's beautiful about this film is that it doesn't get mired in ambiguity like many films do. And then you spend so much of your time and your energy trying to understand what's going on, like the end of 2001, right? Like, how am I supposed to have an emotional reaction to the end of 2001? I know Tony's gonna, like, he's fucking furious right now, he's gonna kill me, but how am I supposed to have an emotional reaction to what's going on? I don't even know what's going on. That's the problem. I don't know what's going on. How can I react to what's going on before I know? And so I have to think about it. I have to cogitate about it. Whereas this movie just says, this girl dies, right? Oh, this girl's reincarnated. This is what happens. This girl is obviously now this other person. And this man he had a severe trauma, and now he's found some solace in that. And it allows you the headspace to resonate with it through the score, through the acting, emotionally. Can you buy in or can't you? And I'm curious what other movies, if you guys understand what I'm trying to say, this idea of like less investigation and more kind of resonation. Time for resonating. Is resonation a word? Resonation. It sounds weird.
Resonance or resonate? I think
Resonance. Yeah.
resonation's a word, but
I don't know. We'll let it slide. But either way, good. If anybody wants to jump in what I'm saying, maybe this movie didn't work for you, but you have an example of some other movie where it's like, yeah, this movie's put its stick on the table and it's told you what it's about, and either you buy it or you don't. Like, either it's stupid and silly and infantile, or it's actually moving, right? And it provides meaning. So anyways.
Well, the movie that for me, I think does what this movie does for you, and I almost wish we hadn't already slotted it ahead for 75 because I don't want to do it already, is Cloud Atlas, because that is a movie that similarly just kind of puts it all out there and, does some things that could be seen as, cringe, right? There are things that people could like, there are things in that movie that would make some people really like go, ugh, like, why would that's so stupid? Or like, why would they do that? Or that's so cheesy, but like, it like wrecks me. Like, it really, really like, and it speaks to those like feelings, those deeper longings, those deeper anxieties, those deeper, I think when a movie resonates with that, I'll let you guys go. I'll let you guys say what your picks are. These are picks. I don't know, but
well, I'd say for me, maybe if I'm kind of understanding this right, like one version of this, of kind of the way you're describing this sort of resonance, to use your term, is maybe one that we did in the past, which is something like Bigger Than Life, which is a movie that sort of fell flat for a lot of you. And of course, any movie could be deep if you want to probe, but I think a lot of that was on its surface. And I think cringe wasn't necessarily the answer you guys fell for, but maybe it just fell flat, or you didn't see what I saw as kind of meaningful. The kind of other movie that is kind of the classic though that I think of for this maybe is like The 400 Blows or something, which has so much of it is just on the surface, that is the emotional aspect that people kind of latch onto more so than a sort of socio-economic perspective maybe, or a kind of symbolic reading of the film.
And Kirk, frankly, I'm kind of blanking. Though I have this feeling, right?
It,
Obviously, for a lot of movies, but I would say it's more.
it doesn't have to be like a soft spot, emotional, like just a movie that knows what it is, like Drive or Heat. You know what I mean? Like a
Sure,
movie
it
that's
just plays
not
its
trying to.
role well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
maybe I'm
exactly.
a little bit overly addicted now that you mention it, Kirk, to the more self-aware and kind of subjective and self-doubting, kind of movies. That maybe I need that in a movie
Serious
that I
man.
can't. I mean, I'm sure I must have movies that I
I'll give you one. Yojimbo, right? Like Yojimbo's
Yojimbo,
pretty
absolutely.
straightforward. I mean, there's
Yeah,
definitely some themes that are kind of clandestine, right? Hidden a little bit, but it's definitely kind of here's what it is, town, two gangs, let's do it, right? Like
yeah,
that's kind of yeah.
I think one thing, Kirk, if I, bring it back to I Origins, there's two particular elements that I think if they were handled maybe a little differently would have made that resonance more palpable for us or maybe to more people in general. I think one thing I didn't think about this when I was watching it, but one of the things Connor said like that really makes sense to me is the fact that I wish I remembered the character's name, but the deceased the dead wife,
Sophie.
Sophie, yes, that's right, Sophie.
Sophie.
The fact that Sophie is not a specific religion, that she's just kind of generally spiritual, and I understand that that's more in line with kind of that's a more contemporary, kind of more millennial way of spirituality, I suppose. Maybe it makes it more relatable.
Williamsburg.
It's kind of like it's a little bit. I mean, maybe it's my bias, but I've always found that kind of attitude a little bit like it's always made me kind of roll my eyes. It's always made me like, really, like, okay, just, like shit or get off the pot, essentially, which is very judgmental and unfair because everyone's spirituality is such a personal, I mean, it's the most personal thing imaginable, right? But it's almost like, why couldn't she have been, a Hindu woman or a Muslim woman or a Protestant woman? You know what I mean? Why couldn't it have been a person who gives herself to a particular, you know what I mean? I would have found that to be a little more, I thought narratively that would have been a little bit of a stronger choice and it would have been put us in the position of an audience a little bit more of an outside view, right? Because if you make her generally spiritual, it's like way too obvious that she's like meant to be kind of likable and right, quote unquote. If you make her a specific religion, then that puts most of the audience in a position of as the outsiders, and unless we are that happen to be that religion, which statistically we're not going to be, then we're in a position of okay, how does my spirituality, how does my sense of these metaphysical things intersect with hers, or is there any commonality? And I think that would have been a little bit that would have been more of a provocative and more of a kind of a narratively strong choice. And I also think narratively, one of the big missteps the screenplay takes is the death itself and its aftermath. There is no time whatsoever with this grief. We are never made to feel the grief. He literally buries the wife and then immediately makes out with his new wife 7 years later, and they're just together and she's pregnant. Like, I feel like this movie really did a disservice to that. Like, I think the grief is such an important thing because I think that is the central problem for religious people and spiritual people is dealing with the death of loved ones. It's the most heartbreaking part of life, and it's something we all deal with sooner or later. And this movie really has no interest in exploring that. So when he says, I don't have closure, that doesn't really land because it's like, I didn't see you grieve. All I see you is you happy now with your wife and child, So I think those are two aspects that I really wish had been handled slightly differently.
Come on, he stole morphine from the lab. Give me a break. He did the classic Leonardo DiCaprio from The Departed. I'm gonna get high on opioids while I mourn the loss of somebody. No, it's your point well taken, Tony. Here's what I have to say about the death scene, not the grieving aspect of it, but the death itself. Having somebody be chopped in half, literally, where her legs are taken away from her. It's this weird aspect where she's still conscious for a few seconds, but he knows there's no saving her. So it's this, you know what I mean? There's always like that tension where it's like, and I put myself in that situation, or at least as much as I could. And it's like so tragic because she's still with you, but there's no chance she's living through that. And I don't know, something about that. And like he doesn't even ask for help, right? He just starts screaming. And I thought that was one of the strongest parts for him in an acting perspective. But I could see why some people would say, Yeah, that's oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. That's that's hilarious even. Some people probably laughed at that element. Oh, she, her legs are gone. But I guess it's all about the subjectivity. But I agree, Tony, the idea of grief wasn't really shown there. But,
Yeah.
religion. Oh, go ahead, Anthony.
Oh,
Go
no,
ahead.
no, I think going back to our initial takes and then hearing yours kind of yours, Kirk, kind of opened some of the movie up for me a bit in a different sense. And then hearing Tony's talk about grief and the idea of what would happen to the narrative if it was a specific religion. And I'm going to disagree with that point, and then yours a little, Kirk, because I think what I've realized is we're thinking about faith here a little too much in the capital R sense of an organized kind of thought process of what that could be, how that could kind of identify here. But I'm going to take the opposite route of you, Kirk, and think about this is when he talks about the idea of wanting closure, we're thinking about that in the sort of spiritual healing sense. But I think really what the movie wants us to think about, or at least the way I do it, because of course, as Tony was saying, faith is so individualistic, is that that's actually something that he shouldn't have. That closure is the scientific basis of his thought, that everything he thinks about from that opening experiment with the eyes to everything is based on the idea of individualistic closure, not necessarily in a healing sense, but he's someone so trained to that thought that everything is individually specific and he could route that sort of route or route that sort of, trajectory. And so what happens here, I think, is we have faith in a different sense, faith in the sense of love. And what we have here is love in two different types of presentations. There's Sophie, who is a love that may not be the person who's like ideal for him, his personal like person who understands his like fascinations and things like that. But what scares him about her is that with her, he's someone who completely loses himself. He gives himself up to her, and that's one old fashioned version of love. And in a way, that's also what faith kind of is, giving yourself up to something kind of bigger and different than yourself. And then there's Britt Marling's character, the scientist, and there's someone who's love in the other sense, love in the sense of shared knowledge, shared trajectory, but he still retained his kind of individual identity there. And so what happens by the time we get to the end with the kind of the girl who may be Sophie reincarnated is it's not reincarnation in its traditional sense of complete renewal of that being. It's reincarnation in the kind of open question of, oh, this person may be Sophie, she may also not be, but the fact that there may be some sort of connection there implies an openness. It's not closure and like the idea of, oh, now all my problems are solved. It's closure in another sense of, oh, I'm never going to be able to identify things in a scientific basis. I'm never going to have a full route of like, this is my narrative now closed. It's left a little open. And I think that's actually the more powerful point of the movie is that faith, love, and all that have the mystery that you have to kind of give yourself up to. And it's never going to be fully solved. And of course, I'm ignoring the post-credit scene in this version.
Yeah, we're that's not canon, guys. That was actually some hack job. We were watching a hacked version, but Anthony, great points, and I'll let Connor go, but I just want to say that you're really onto something there, and I think it's almost a perversion of the idea of faith that he needs this validation at the end. But then again, I really think that he kind of comes to grips a little bit maybe, and it's on the nose definitely, like we would never get this kind of closure in real life, but the idea is that maybe he's relinquishing a little bit the positivist because she did fail the test, right? So he's looking at this one symbol that has so much significance and that he's taking with him, and maybe he's going to put it behind him. I don't know, that's how I like to read the end. But you're right, Anthony, really spot on. Connor, go ahead. Yeah,
I mean, what's funny about this is, he has a kind of his own kind of spirituality, which is based in science, right? As he says, he has a kind of, sort of pop science, Bill Nye style, right? Like we were together, right? For the Big Bang, right? Our atoms were all together, right? And our atoms have crashed into each other at various moments. Now, what you wonder about this, like my atoms love your atoms, right? Now, the problem with this, of course, is you could say, well, so everyone else's atoms, right? We're all equally interrelated, right? Or at least there's no way to know if we're more related to each other than anyone else, right? But isn't that an interesting thought, right? That if we're all interrelated, there really is like not that much difference between us, right? That's an idea. this doctrine, which basically, I mean, we call it reincarnation, but it's the idea of a soul, which maybe can be imprinted in different ways, but it's still the same soul. Somehow the girl would still be Sophie in some way, right? And that's the hope. But the realization that she might not be Sophie, or even if she were Sophie in some way, she'd also be her own person, right? Like, you have to wonder, like, well, what actually makes the girl special? Why is it the case that he can only help her, right, and not everyone else in the world? Of course, he can't help everyone, right? But there's something a little weird to me in that it has to be bringing back his dead wife that leads him to help the girl, if indeed he helps the girl. I was thinking maybe he would adopt her or something. That's where I thought it was going. It's purposefully ambiguous on that front. Maybe the movie is trying to avoid all of these problematics. But I think there's kind of a selfishness to that too, that it's like, she has to have the soul of my dead wife, that I love so much, right, for me to care about her. But I thought maybe the movie was going the direction of maybe no, like, because we all share atoms and our atoms all love each other's atoms and that kind of thing. Maybe that is itself very hippy dippy and lame. But like, that's where I was kind of hoping the movie might go. And I think it doesn't get past this kind of individualistic. And again, and even like, again, to Sophie's whole spirituality is also like entwined completely with her sexiness, kind of, it's almost synonymous with her joie de vivre, and this kind of thing. But I think like spirituality, I often think of it as a kind of as an unworldly or as a kind of transcendent, sort of thing. But obviously that, sexuality and joie de vivre can also be that as well. But anyway,
you're telling me you watched Silence, Martin Scorsese's Silence, and weren't just raging hard the whole movie?
It was raging hard. It's true. Okay, but that's okay, Catholic.
Like,
that's a Catholic thing.
It's because you're a sicko.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just,
I gotta say, I loved what Connor just said, and it makes me wish there was another version of this movie, maybe with an extra hour on it, that has that, like him taking her back and like adopting her or whatever, maybe out of this like selfish need to like recreate, or bring back this person or whatever. Like you said, only to discover actually that we are all part of one thing, and that would be his spirituality. And it would bring back the thing with the atoms. Like, that could be really powerful. I think I would have preferred that a lot too, because again, with the ending, with what we got, it is kind of ambiguous, but it doesn't, like, I didn't feel like he had come to some like really, there was no epiphanic moment for me of like, oh, it all clicks, it all makes sense. Like, that would have been the epiphany. That would have been a thing that would have tied it all together. So,
all right, well, we'll wrap it up. And this is what I'm glad we're generating some organic discussion here, or we did generate some organic discussion. I think what we can all agree on is that this movie kind of punches at some of the conventions, at least narratively speaking, or like thematically speaking. And the idea of religion or spirituality, whatever you want to call it, in this kind of movie, in this kind of setting, or I guess time in history and film history, I think is something to be lauded. But nevertheless, let's get this over with. To the abattoir we go. Let's hear it. Let's go with Connor first.
Sure. I think I'm so glad we had this discussion. I feel a little bad because Kirk is so earnest. It feels hard to be so harsh. But yeah, I guess I would reiterate, sort of what I said. I have like, now that I've developed a little more of a stronger critique of maybe the movie's message. I didn't have that at the beginning. A lot of things just didn't vibe with me, whereas they did vibe with Kirk. So I have to say no on the basis of the initial vibe, and thinking about it, there's things I take issue with. I think it could be improved. I think there definitely is something to get out of this movie. I would have developed it differently, and that's, just my opinion. So I would say no.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. I don't really have much hope here to try to split a 1-1. I guess I'll go to Tony, my main man, the best looking guy I know, just really great guy. Well hung.
I'll repeat what I said. I'll just reiterate some of my main points. Just one, admire the chutzpah, admire the moxie. This movie's got moxie. This movie's got hearts, and I really admire that. I'll also say one other thing that I forgot to mention earlier that I did like is just one of the love scenes where they're just kind of hanging out, and there's music in the background and they're like cuddling and talking. It felt very real and very naturalistic, and it felt like I was like this, like as silly as some of the stuff leading up to it may have been, I thought that moment was very strong. And it's a moment you don't typically see in a lot of movies. And like, even just like the casual, like nudity, like it felt, I don't know, like there was something about it I thought felt like kind of cool. No, I mean,
love that part.
no, I thought it was good. I thought it was like it was like a nice love scene. But however,
no, I agree.
I do agree that I would just reiterate that, like, I think the screenplay just needed another draft. I think these ideas needed to be refined a little bit more, and the structure needed to be kind of moved around a little bit. So I can't give it a yes, but I admire it in a lot of ways. So
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, and I will say shades of Penelope Cruz and Vanilla Sky for me. That scene for sure, definitely. Think about it. But I also resonated with the casual nudity, as you say. No, it felt very naturalistic, that scene. Anthony, go ahead. Round us out.
All right. So I'll try to make this quick, but just a few points that we didn't touch on. One, this movie has some of the most stylish eyeglasses I've ever seen for all the characters. Two, I got to say, I'm a little biased, I think, with this movie because I am also a 26-year-old PhD student living in New York City.
True. Yeah.
Experience is totally like mine. Not from
Brooklyn, no less.
Everybody hanging out on the subway. Okay, but finally, I'm just going to quickly say is I'm going to once again disagree with Connor's point about the kind of universalist atoms thing, and that Tony also liked, because I think what we're missing here, and I think Kirk was onto it in the kind of early introduction, is it's not about the epiphany. And it's not about the epiphanic sort of moment. That would push it into traditional realms. And that there is someone there, I think, who has that kind of view you think of, Connor. And that's Britt Marling's science character. But I think what we have here is even the scientists have a doubt about that sort of route. And what we want is a sort of openness and a sort of doubt into our lives. We want to be questioned. We don't want the epiphany. We want the moment of where do we go from here? I think that's really kind of the movie's trump card about faith. And I think the other weird moment that I really wish we could have talked about, but struck me as super odd, is the moment he's in the elevator and he seems to be next to this sort of like missionary, this sort of more traditional like person, which seems like
salesman slash missionary.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think he's finding out a sort of faith that's going to work for him somewhere in between this sort of uber science kind of route of the grand universe, the Big Bang, and the kind of traditional faith of a missionary type person who goes to India. I think really that's there. I don't think it's fully fleshed out necessarily. But anyway, I'll say yes, if only because I did really like some of those themes. I can't think of another movie, maybe besides like Last Temptation of Christ, that really pushes some of these ideas on me. Or maybe some of like, I don't know, Terrence Malick's kind of faith aspects. I don't think it's a great movie. I don't think it's even necessarily maybe a good one. I think the themes, like the way Tony talked about Book of Henry, if they work for you, you're going to find something to talk about and think about after.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate the yes there, and I will hold on to it, and I will put it in my pocket. Thank you all for such a scintillating dialogue we've just had. And let's now move on to our final piece where we will be nominating films. Well, I won't be. You three will be nominating films for me to choose between. So Tony has gone least recently. He's on a little bit of a cold streak. He's looking to bounce back. Tony, what is the order for today's nominations?
let's go Connor, Anthony, me.
All right, going last again. Go ahead, Connor.
Okay, Kirk. In honor of your interest in older movies, we can take you back even further. Going back to the first 3 decades of film, more or less, I guess first 4, you could say. Talking about 1934's I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, which is about, well, the title pretty much tells you everything. It's about a fugitive from a chain gang. And it's sort of considered, kind of a political film classic, right? That was a kind of consciousness raising film with obviously plenty of artistic merits that have been other kind of issue films, obviously before this. But it was kind of famous as a kind of left-wing critique of the prison system. And maybe it won't satisfy quite on the level of a true left-wing, a highly political critique, but obviously it examines the plight and examines the issues, right, surrounding, right, like chain gangs, right, and a certain kind of operation of prisons in the United States. It obviously has issues in it. It has, sort of politics or sort of social ruminations in it, but it's also kind of a straightforward adventure as well.
Interesting. Okay, great. So there's dialogue, right? I don't want to date
Yeah,
myself.
it's a talkie.
It's
a talking picture.
I probably sound really stupid because I'm guessing the like silent films were totally phased out even in the like early 20s, I'm guessing, or
no, I think like 29 were some of the first talkie films, right? So I'm not sure how many silent films there were in 1934, but I think there were some still.
Oh, okay. I don't feel so dumb. Thank you, Connor. That's really interesting one to consider, and I want to hear more. But go ahead, Anthony.
All right. I just want to start by saying, Kirk, you got 2 no's for this movie. A Michael Pitt movie is not in the 706. So don't you want a Michael Pitt movie in the 706?
Wow, damn.
All right. I'm going to nominate 2004 Bernardo Bertolucci's The Dreamers, which stars a extremely handsome young Michael Pitt, an extremely beautiful Eva Green and Louis Garrel. And the movie is sort of a leftist critique of 1968. The 1968 student riots of Paris, but it's essentially a story about an American expat studying abroad for a term who loves film, who loves the film culture of France and the U.S. at the time, and he kind of falls into this relationship with a pair of twins played by Louis Garrel and Eva Green, and it's sort of a decadent look and a critique at the decadence of this kind of hypocrisy of the moment. And the movie's kind of just there. And I think, it's going to have a lot of great stuff going for it. So,
all right. So I'm going to do something that I'm kind of loath to do. I don't want to do this, but inspired by Kirk's courage, showing us his soul, showing us the underside of that mossy rock that is his little soul. I'll do the same thing and pick the movie that is lodged in my large intestine, the movie that I can't get out of my head, the movie I can't not pitch. It's Oasis. It's the movie I pitched it to you last time. That's why I'm hesitant to do it. That's why I say I'm loath to do it. But it's a movie I see in my dreams, and it's the movie I'm looking at my other movies, and I'm like, that's the one I want to do. That's the one I want to do. You know what I mean? Like that's what it boils down to. Like I have a lot of movies on my list, but that's the one that at this particular moment, at this particular time, feels right for me to return to it. It comes to me. I have visions, and I don't know what it is, but there's something about it's calling to me right now. It's calling to me right now. This is the one. This is the one. And Mishima is also kind of crying out a little bit, but Oasis in particular at this moment is what's crying out. So I pitched it to you last time, so I'm hesitant to pitch it to you twice in a row, but I can't deny. And as a little refresher, Korean film from 2002 by Lee Chang-dong, who has done Burning and Secret Sunshine, among other films. Those are the 2 other ones I've seen. And this is an emotionally searing romantic drama about the relationship between a man, like an ex-con, and a woman with cerebral palsy. Very provocative, very uncomfortable, but truly one of my favorite movies of all time. And it's just quintessentially Tony. And there's something telling me, it's calling me. It's like, we need to do it. Sooner or later, we need to do it. And we need to get Kirk on the record. Right. We need to get Kirk on the record as well for this one.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. Let's hear some rebuttals. I don't want to play my hand just yet. Let's hear some rebuttals. I don't even want to influence anything. So go ahead, Connor.
I'm sorry, Anthony. What was your movie called?
The Dreamers.
Oh, okay. I was actually wondering what it was called. Okay. So The Dreamers sounded very interesting. I don't know anything about it, but my interest has definitely peaked. As for Tony's, I've seen it. I'm interested. I'm intrigued that it's left such a deep impression on Tony, because I didn't see that coming. I didn't feel the deep impression myself, but I would love to revisit the film for that reason, to understand and to take another look at it, because it's a very interesting film. And as I said last time, I tried to defend Tony, run interference for him. I think it's a love story, right? It obviously deals with this shocking sort of subject matter, a shocking premise, but it's a traditional love story in so many ways. As for Fugitive from a Chain Gang, the actor certainly has the same haircut as Michael Pitt from Boardwalk Empire. If I recall correctly, he looks a little bit like Michael Pitt. Anyway, I think I front loaded my argument a little bit at the beginning. Interesting to go back to the 1930s. If that interests you, Kirk, I would say it's a direction we could go in. I think it still kind of holds up. It's fun to see some of the filmic talents on display for that era, and get a little taste of what moviegoing was like, and sort of how politics could play a role in film going at the time.
All right, thank you. No, that you did a great job describing it. Yeah, and kind of rounding back as well. So, Anthony, go ahead.
All right. Well, okay. So Oasis is a great documentary on the rock band. Best music documentary in the rock band. No, okay. So, I mean, Connor's movies sounds super fascinating. I actually have not seen it. So there's that. I love me some old movies, and it's been a while since I feel like we've gone back, although I guess we did A Place in the Sun so many episodes ago. I mean, Tony really wants us to watch the movie, so I mean, there's the pull for that. I will say The Dreamers. I will also say, like, it's a movie that also kind of revels in the sort of question of idealism and romanticism. So maybe that's something we don't necessarily want to get back to immediately after I Origins, but I think, it's a really interesting movie about why perhaps 1968 failed. Why did those revolutions not work? But also looking back at this kind of culture where film was still a sort of primary mode of the intelligentsia, and the way people argue, it's almost a sort of NYU student's dream of the way we could have lived our lives in the dorms at times. I got to say, if Tony loved the sort of casual nudity of I Origins, he's going to love the excessive nudity of The Dreamers.
All right. Well, question. No, actually, I won't ask. I won't inquire about the specific nudity.
I will
Tony,
say, real quick, actually, before I go,
Yeah.
I got to say this. Good conscience is it's directed by Bernardo Bertolucci, who I think in some circles is probably canceled for his relation on The Last Tango of Paris. So I'll throw that out there.
So we have two cancelable choices of the three. That's great.
I know nothing about that. Go ahead.
I'd love to watch I Am a Fugitive from a Gangbang, but my Skinemax subscription has run out. And as for The Dreamers, my spinoff podcast, Pittsburgh, just did I Origins followed by The Dreamers. So I really don't want to double dip. Now, as for Oasis, I guess what my best pitch to you, Kirk, would be to go back to your question earlier about the film, that idea of resonance, or the idea of, to me, the reason I am stuck on this movie is that it's one of those things where if you wanted me to explain why it's great or why I like it so much right now or what's good about it, because I've tried to, having only seen it once, articulate just to myself or try to figure about it or figure out what it is that stuck with me about it, and I can't. I kind of can't. And I think, to me, there's something meaningful about that. There's something powerful about that when something speaks to you in a way that's undeniable. To me, the effect it had on me was undeniable, and yet I'm at a loss to explain some parts of it that I think are essential to it, that are, impossible to separate out. It's a movie that kind of begs to be kind of defended, and I at times don't feel up to the task, but in a way it's a challenge. There's just something about it that really sticks with me, and I can't put my words on it. And I just know that, to me, it's when I feel that way about a movie, I feel like I have to push it forward. That's all. So that's my pitch for it.
Okay. I will start off by saying this is the best selection of films to counteract that Halloween special where Monkey Shines was the winner of the bunch. And
that was amazing. I'm sorry.
Monkey Shines is a good movie. Yeah, but let's see here. Yeah, best selection I've had. I will watch all three of these movies gladly. This is tough. This is actually very tough. I have to be a man of my word, actually, in a way. Earlier in this podcast, I said I'm a sentimentalist, right? I did say that. And when I see someone moved in a certain way, it's actually inspiring. And I go back to the movie Her, when Joaquin Phoenix says, are we just experiencing the same emotions but with less intensity? Have we already experienced everything we're going to experience, and it's just going to be less intense, right? And so any movie that really evokes in that way and provokes our emotional our emotional receptors is okay by me. So I will, even though I really fucking want to choose Anthony's movie because of Michael Pitt, and I am such a Michael Pitt fan, I will go with Tony. I'm trusting you, Tony. I'm trusting that you're going to tell us why this movie means, even though you can't describe it, perhaps on a second viewing, you're going to try to bring us in, try to, round it out, and at least let us into your mind when you're watching it. And maybe if we can't get there, you'll kind of feel a little bit how I felt today, at least. But either way, I will choose Tony to go next. And Connor, I want to see Red Dead Redemption 2, the movie, but we'll have to wait on that one. No, I'm kidding. I actually really
Red Dead
do want to
Redemption
see that.
3, which should take place during the Great Depression.
That is true because it takes place after, obviously,
Yeah.
the first two games. So this could be a good Arthur's son or something. We don't know. But
Yep.
anyways, guys, I really appreciate it. This was long in the tooth, this episode, and I if you stuck with us, we really appreciate it. And what more is there to say? Anthony, take us away.
I'll have what she's having.